Stress is the body's natural response to pressure. In small doses, it helps us perform better, but when it becomes chronic, it starts to overwhelm the mind and body. Central to this process are powerful hormones that shape our stress response. The main hormone responsible for the stress response is cortisol, often called the stress hormone. It's released by the adrenal glands when we perceive a threat. Cortisol works alongside adrenaline and norepinephrine, which increase heart rate, blood pressure, and energy, preparing the body for fight or flight.
In the brain, stress signals are sent to the hypothalamus. This in turn releases hormones that make their way to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland then releases its hormones to the adrenal cortex, which instructs our bodies to make extra cortisol to deal with the stress. Cortisol allows all the cells in our body to flood with additional energy to aid in the fight or flight response.
When the brain senses stress, it triggers the hypothalamus, which signals the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland then instructs the adrenal glands to release cortisol. This process is essential in the short term, but when stress is persistent, elevated cortisol levels can wreak havoc on the body, leading to issues like fatigue, irritability, and poor concentration. Over time, chronic stress can dysregulate the balance of cortisol and other hormones, laying the groundwork for more serious mental health challenges, such as depression. Depression is more than an emotional state. It's a biological condition deeply influenced by the brain's chemistry. Stress hormones like cortisol continue to play a role, but other key players emerge, altering how the brain functions and how we experience life.
The researchers have identified the FKBP5 gene as one of several important causes of our hormonal stress regulation. Variants in this gene could be partly responsible for why we react with more or less stress. The researchers are now looking for a way to block activity directly at the FKBP5 gene.
Stress causes too much of this FKBP5 to be released, and that people simply release too much of the stress hormone even after the slightest stress. And we know that too much of this stress hormone in the long term is bad for many processes, including the brain, which also increases the risk of psychiatric illnesses.
In individuals with depression, we often see elevated levels of cortisol, which can damage parts of the brain, especially the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and learning. High cortisol levels can shrink this area, affecting cognitive functions and emotional regulation. Depression is also associated with changes in neurotransmitters, the chemicals that communicate between brain cells. The most notable of these are serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. Serotonin regulates mood, sleep, and appetite, while dopamine is linked to pleasure and motivation. Norepinephrine, also involved in stress, affects alertness and energy. Low levels of serotonin and dopamine can leave a person feeling drained, apathetic, and unable to find joy. But it's not just about the chemicals, it's also about the prolonged impact of stress hormones like cortisol, slowly wearing down the mind. An estimated 280 million people worldwide suffer from depression, according to the WHO. This number represents around 3.8% of the global population, including 5.0% of adults and 5.7% of adults over 60 years old. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, the US has one of the highest reported rates of depression, with about 5% of the adult population experiencing depression in a given year. In Europe, countries like Ukraine and Estonia also report high rates of depression, with significant impacts due to economic and political stress. Suicide. Suicide is often the tragic result of untreated or overwhelming depression. While the decision to end one's life is complex and deeply personal, research shows that imbalances in brain chemistry, driven by stress and depression, can play a critical role.
We know that when someone is thinking about suicide, they usually don't do that in isolation. They're going to show warning signs. They're going to give clues to the people that are closest to them, usually family, loved ones, spouses, and whatnot. I would encourage those loved ones to look for those signs of kind of end-of-life language, that life is hopeless and life is, I feel worthless, and there's no hope for my future. Individuals who are contemplating suicide will start to isolate and not be as social, and looking for that change in behavior can be really, really important. There are other clues that individuals might be contemplating suicide, like end-of-life planning. They might start to give away their possessions, start to kind of handle their affairs. And then one of the most concerning signs is a direct warning, where an individual who's contemplating suicide will send a message, a text message, or write a suicide note. And one of the worst things we can do is just assume that somebody is doing it for attention, because people don't complete suicide for attention. They kill themselves because they're in intense psychological distress. And we want to pay attention to all of those warning signs and get them the help that they need.
It was the year 1994 and the first day of spring. My mother, my dogs, or my dad, my dogs, and I, we decided to go on a walk while my mother got ready for the day's events planned ahead. When we had returned home, though, everything in my life had changed from that moment on. I was 3 years old when I had found my mother, who had completed a suicide by hanging. And without any therapy or educational resources to help, I ended up struggling academically, socially, and emotionally.
People suffering from severe depression often have imbalances in their serotonin and dopamine levels, which impair their ability to see solutions or feel pleasure. This, combined with elevated cortisol, can lead to a deep sense of hopelessness. The brain is literally working against them.
When I was 23 years old, I stood at our church pulpit and delivered the eulogy at the funeral of a man who was a dedicated husband, father, farmer, and friend. A man who was respected by his community and beloved by his family. That man was my dad, and my dad died by suicide. I remember the day of his funeral vividly. It was the second day of January, the beginning of a new year. It was bitterly cold. like the step outside and your breath is taken away type of cold. The type of cold that makes you not want to be anywhere else but in your home. The type of cold that could leave your hands and feet numb. And the cold perfectly described how I was feeling at the time. My dad's death took not only my breath, but a piece of my heart away. I really didn't want to leave the house that day, and certainly not for his funeral. And no matter what anyone said or did, I was numb. And I'm so thankful that I practiced his eulogy over and over again, because my eyes were so welled with tears that I couldn't even read the paper of words in front of me. Nothing could have prepared me to stand up in front of my family, our neighbors, and our friends and use my words to beg them not to let the way my dad died, a result of debilitating depression and anxiety, diminish the legacy of caring and compassion he left behind. But that's what the stigma surrounding mental illnesses has done. It's made us uncomfortable. It's made mental illnesses hard to talk about. It's made us treat people differently who we've known our entire lives. The stigma has forced us to feel shame and guilt about an illness caused by chemical imbalances in the brain that are beyond our control.
When serotonin and dopamine levels drop drastically, combined with prolonged cortisol exposure, the brain can reach a state where rational thinking becomes impaired. The perception of being trapped or worthless overwhelms any thoughts of hope or recovery.
Hi Lucy, nice to meet you.
Hi.
So I understand that you were referred here by your GP because you've been feeling quite down recently.
Yeah, I thought I've been feeling quite bad for quite a while, so I thought maybe it's time to see someone about it because I don't want to feel like this anymore.
Okay, so from your notes I saw that you saw the GP about 3 months ago.
Yeah.
So how long have you been feeling down altogether?
Quite a few months before that as well, actually, but it's gotten pretty bad these past few months, so that's kind of why I came.
Okay, so has it got worse since you saw your GP?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me, how are things at the moment?
Well, it kind of started just feeling a bit low and wound up about things, but I don't know, just recently I just can't really be bothered to do anything at all. I kind of find it hard to get motivated for things, and I really want to be better, but it's just kind of reaching the end now where I want to do something about it.
Okay, so you said that you're feeling really down, really sad.
Yeah.
And you feel like you haven't got any motivation. But are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine, sorry.
Okay, and you haven't got any motivation, but it sounds like you're putting quite a lot of pressure on yourself to try and feel a bit better.
Yeah, it's kind of hard as well because there's not really anyone to talk about, so I just kind of stay on my own I don't like to think about it, but I just know.
Okay. So you say you've been, you're feeling quite isolated, there's not many people around?
Yeah, there's no one I can talk to about it. No one would listen or understand anyway.
But even at this point, help is possible. Suicide is preventable. By recognizing the signs, such as withdrawal, mood changes, and giving away belongings and offering support, we can save lives.
With regard to children, there's little if any justification for using powerful antidepressants, and with older children and adolescents, extreme care is advised. There's risks of both cardiovascular complications and also suicide. So the extreme care should be exercised. In my view, only specialists should be prescribing.
The journey from stress and depression to healing is often long, but it is possible. Hormones like serotonin and dopamine can be balanced with treatment, allowing people to reconnect with the world around them. Our hormones may drive much of our stress, depression, and recovery, but there is one factor that remains constant: the power of connection. Having people who care, support, and listen can make all the difference in breaking the cycle of despair. If you, or someone you know is struggling, remember that there is help. Whether through therapy, medication, or simply talking to someone, hope is always within reach.